Greetings to all you warlords out there. Rodge here. Welcome to Saga Thursday, your regular source for that Saga, the miniatures game content. We have a battle report for you today. Age of Magic, my demons of the Otherworld versus my friend Davies, Lords of the Wild Wood Elves. And he came on over to my place. We're playing on my table. We're playing the Battle of Heroes, which are the cards in the Book of Battle. So I highly recommend picking these cards up from the Studio Tomahawk website if you have not already, and just using them. It's just easier to have the cards there on the side of the table, and you can see any, your standard game. You don't have to think ahead, but you can have your scenery, deployment, game length, victory conditions, and a special rule just to add a little spice to your regular games of Saga. So these are the cards that we picked up in the image here. I'm just going to jump to the first photo of the battlefield. It'll be easier to explain the cards that we drew. So Davey ended up being the first player in our game of Saga here, and I'll be curious if folks prefer going first or second. We're both in agreement that we prefer to go second for most of the time. But in any case, so Davey, for rough ground, he could set up 3 pieces of terrain. Lords of the Wild. Naturally, he chose three woods here. So one large one in the middle here, and then 2 small ones here. And so he can use those, they're uneven ground, to shoot out of. He can transform the woods on either side, but this one in the middle is too large here. So maybe if he was to play again, he would pick a smaller piece in the middle so he could have that threat of transforming it into a Titan. The scenario deployment was pincer attack. So this one is interesting. So you have to split up your army in this one. So Dave deployed first, basically in this square. And then I deployed second in this square. And then he deployed his guys up top in this square. And then I deployed the rest of mine down here in each of the corners. So you can go up to 18 inches in. And Davey, he wanted to get some shooting in on me. Wasn't quite sure what I could do. So he deployed all the way back. And just a heads up, if it looks like I'm over the halfway line, we measured out the 3x4. We're playing on a 4x6 battle mat. So he just didn't put these little markers that we made back here for the edge of the table. They should be 2 inches back. So we correct that before we even play. But for these initial photos here, his guys will be a little further away once we begin the game. So I just deployed all up in his face to limit the shooting. And then also our victory conditions were survival points, which is keeping your guys alive. And a lot of times it works out the same as massacre points for the most part. Heroes kind of are a little less valuable under this system, but for the most part, you're not going to have a game where if it was kind of as massacre points you would win and kind of survival points you would lose. I don't think you're going to have a lot of those. But the extra victory condition was if you can get a unit of 4 or more models more than long from your own board edge at the end of the game, will give you 2 bonus points. So we can already see my guys are set up for success. Already over that. The long mark is probably in the back, right towards there. So Davey, he's setting himself up to have a conservative first turn, weaken me with some shooting perhaps, but everything being even, I'm gonna have a pretty big advantage here with having my whole army scoring bonus points essentially. So he's going to have to go for a pretty huge win here. He's just going to have to wipe out all my guys. Whereas if we end up having a pretty even game, I'm going to essentially take it with my bonus points because I'm going to have guys on his half of the table scoring points for me. So that is that. Why don't we go through our armies here? So on my side, I have 4 points of warriors split into 3 units. So I've got a unit of 11 warriors with heavy weapons on the end here. And actually, I'll just go down. So I've got quadruped creatures right here. I've got a behemoth right there hanging out. I've got my sorceress, and she is flying. So potentially some weakness against the Lords of the Wild, susceptible to shooting. But I think I can keep her alive with so few pieces of terrain. I've got both of my warrior units are in these pieces of terrain here, so he won't be able to use his special board abilities to shoot out of them at me. And just the way everything's set up, I think I'll be okay. And being able to fly will be more valuable than the vulnerability to shooting. So I've got my warlord on a beast down at the end there. I've got another unit of quadruped creatures, and then a unit of 10 flyers on my flank all the way down there on the end. And on Davy's side, he's got a unit of levy with javelins, a unit of Hearthguard on foot. His warlord is back here. He's got his wizard right there. But this is a behemoth. Kind of looks like a titan to me, but he's using it as behemoth. He's got a unit of 8 warriors with bows and a scourge monster there. A unit of 8 warriors on foot, just doing their thing. Nothing special about them. And then 4 Hearthguard. So Davey, he's going for maximum Saga dice generation here. And he's a newer player. He's been playing Saga maybe 6 months or so. He played in the tournament a couple of months ago that I talked about. So he's had 4 or 5 games here, and we talked about his list, and he likes his setup here with all these Saga dice, because even when one of these goes down, I think he'll still be generating the full number. So Davey is going first, but there's another shot here. So the game will go until the 4th turn, and then someone can voluntarily end the game, but their opponent will get another turn. The first player begins the game in the first turn. They cannot activate any unit to shoot or charge via Saga abilities or special rules. So this is pretty gnarly for Dave here, and that's another reason he ended up deploying so far away. So it's not both players who can't shoot or charge. It's just the first player. So, again, probably the scenario is forcing Davey to deploy so far back here. So he's just going to have to load up on defense. Another shot of his tree man there, like his big schnoz there. More of his troops. And, all right, so essentially this is Davey's first turn. I didn't take a picture of his Saga dice yet, but so if he can't shoot or charge, you just kind of has to set up for reaction. And so all he does really is move his Hearthguard forward on this side over here on that flank there on the left. And everybody else is kind of hunkering down. He could have potentially maneuvered his Scourge to get behind my lines, but not really any advantage to that per se, perhaps at this point. So another shot of his Hearthguard there. Okay, so we're down to business. So here we are getting into some action on my turn. So I am set up here. I've got 3 dice on my warriors and creatures and a couple attack defensive abilities, and I've got a attack run in mind here, and it's becoming my signature move, which is going after the enemy sorcerer if they're vulnerable on the first turn. So Davey had the sorcerer. I'm not going to get into spells because it's not going to matter too much as for what he had at this point, but his board is stacked. However, if we take a look at it, he didn't really give himself any defensive abilities here. So he does have 2 activation reactions, and one of them is retreat, but he can only activate that when a unit is within short of terrain. So he's on that back line there. He's not going to be able to use this because his guys are so far away. The Hearthguard will, but nobody else will. And he's got Living Roots, which it's just not a great ability. And towards the end of the game, it could be useful. But so trigger this after enemy activation. The next movement or charge, if the turn is made as if the unit is moving through uneven terrain. So at the start of the game, when you have all your maneuvers, you won't be able to do much of anything with this. So he could see what's coming, pop this, and then I just maneuver a unit in the back that to the side or something. So it really easy to negate. So he thought that he had some defense up, but he really didn't. His other abilities are just kind of gearing up for the next turn. So if he just had Sacred Dance or Call of the Wild, just some extra attack or defense dice here, he probably could have survived my first turn. I begin with a double activation on my creatures here. So the way these sticks are laid out aren't quite accurate. So the first creature, he was about right here or so. So I started with a movement activation, and at that point his Hearthguard could have decided to try and intersperse themselves in some fashion. He didn't really know what my plan was, but even if he had done that, the quadrupeds or cavalry, you could do a 2 medium movements. So even if he had gotten in my way somehow, I could have just moved around them and then gotten to the sorcerer on my second activation in any way. And so there was no way for him to stop my creatures from getting in here. So I like the creatures for my attack run, as you can get up to 4 fatigue on them. And so if your first attack fails, generally you'll have a second attempt at it. And then since they're creatures, they'll have to, it'll be up to them how they use their fatigue, but generally they're going to want to leave that on them, so it's not going to dull your attack. So I pop Might, which is my favorite Saga ability, I think, for the Otherworld. A lot of good ones there. But it gives me an extra 3 attacks. I can reroll 3 dice. So I can completely slaughter this sorcerer. And then I pot a fatigue on the Behemoth and a fatigue on his Warlord. And we'll see the results of that. And it looks like the sorcerer got a hit through that I had to cancel with fatigue. So I'm at 3 fatigues on my creatures here. They are now vulnerable themselves, but I got a plan there. So Saga is a game of tit for tat here in some ways. So if you're going after someone, you're going to sacrifice your model. So I killed that sorcerer. He's 1 point. These creatures are 1 point. If he just is able to kill these outright, we're kind of back to square one. So it's important that when I go in and disrupt his plans, that I have models ready to pounce on those models. So I'm always kind of putting him on the back foot. So my sorcerer moves up. I put a fatigue with drain life onto the Hearthguard there. So surrounding my creatures with fatigue models. Very nice. Move up the Behemoth, like I said, to get within charge range and hopefully threaten these guys if he tries to go after these creatures, which he probably will. They're kind of weak in defense, so they're vulnerable. I decide to maneuver over my Warlord and the creatures in the back here. And that is because, like I was just saying, if Davey wants to, he could probably do a double move with his Scourge and get into my Sorceress and potentially take her out. Not quite as many attacks. He can't augment them. But if that happens, I want to be able to take out the Scourge on my turn with my creatures or my Warlord here. So kind of just getting in a position to jump onto him. And I think that is how the turn is going to end here. And another shot. Okay, on my turn, I've got Flood of Power, Astral Bond, Supernatural stature. Davy's queuing up some attack items here, and let's see what he gets up to. So to kick off, he does some shooting, shoots out of this forest here with ambush, kills a couple of my flyers. It was either them or the warriors, so he's just using that ability that he queued up last time. Nothing I could do about that. Charges in is Behemoth here into my creatures. So I am Resilience 2, so I can take up to 2 wounds and still live. I do have Supernatural Stature, which I can use to block on 4s. And we're going to see the immensity. So Davy's dice are these big dice, the big red ones, and mine are the little red ones. So he only gets 3 hits here. And 1, 2, I don't know if he's rolling. He had more dice. They're just not showing on the camera. And I get 3 or 4 hits. I don't remember. Maybe he used the fatigue. But unfortunately, due to that, he ends up bouncing. But my creatures are exhausted now. And on his next activation, he brings his levy over. And they javelin my boys to death here. So you're talking with Davy. He should have done that in the reverse order. So you're going to move the javelins over, pop the last fatigue onto my creatures. They would have been exhausted, so his Behemoth would have taken less damage on the way in, and then just everything being even, that would have been the better play in my opinion. So nobody's within 4 inches here of my creatures, so we don't care. And unfortunately, that is it. So for some reason, he moved his Behemoth back, it looks like. I'm not sure exactly why he did that. But on my turn, got more activations loaded up here. Once you're playing this tit for tat style, it seems like I just use my dice more for activating my guys. More so than using my various powers here. So my turn, you can see I'm casting a spell. So what is that other spell? Bane, I think, just to reroll 6s. Yeah, you can see the little marker there. My warriors are within short, so I send my warriors in to take out his Hearthguard, who have a fatigue on them. And I use that fatigue, so I'm hitting them on 3s. Yeah. Take their armor 5 down to 4. And then +1. So a boatload of hits. He gets a boatload of hits on me in return. I believe I had Supernatural Stature up, so I was blocking on 4s. So I eliminated the Hearthguard there. And the death of those lads has put a fatigue on the levy. And I decide to go in with my Behemoth there. So engaging levy, that's kind of a sticking point. But usually if you're engaging levy, you're doing something wrong. But at a minimum, if the levy have a fatigue on them and you're hitting them on 2s, I think that's the minimum. If you're hitting them on 3s, or you're fatigued yourself, so you could be hitting them on 3s, it's just not worth it trying to get through all those bodies. So I didn't want him using his excellent shooting abilities with those guys. On this flank, they're really the only shooting unit left. So I need to whittle them down, take them out with my Behemoth here. So going in fresh, he's fatigued. I'm hitting on 2s. I hit with every single one of my attacks. And he gets a hit in. So yeah, good for him. He doesn't make... He makes 2 saves, maybe. I don't know. He gets basically wiped out, which is extremely unlikely, but I will take it. Puts a fatigue on his Warlord up here. So I'm really happy about that, I got to say. Take another. I think that wound did go through, and then I have a fatigue from the combat on my Behemoth. So already things are going pretty good here for my lads. So just moving up my creatures in the back, the Warlord again, maneuvering up, getting ready my sorceress, once again, it is potentially vulnerable, so I just want to be able to jump on that Scourge if he comes over. But otherwise, his battle line on that side, the left side, is crumbling, so I just want to keep feeding as many units into there as I can, and then kind of just hold the line on the other side. So I do decide to maneuver over my flying warriors here. So this is one of my favorite things to do with the flyers and maneuver. So, once again, talking about that tit for tat thing. So if he chooses to engage my behemoth here, just the way that he goes in means that he could potentially stay out of range of my warlord and my creatures who are down on the bottom here. So if he does go after the behemoth and take it out, I'll be able to charge in fresh with my flying warriors here and take out his warlord on my following turn. So it's just always having something ready to pounce on the other guy is one of my main goals here. And then with my last activation, I'll move up my warriors, and basically all this does is going to stop his maneuvers on his troops here. I think these 3 units are stopped from maneuvering, and I think his Hearthguard on the very end can maneuver, but basically that stops him from redeploying them to the other side there to help out with his behemoth and warlord over there. He can still use dice to move those guys over, and if he wants to spend his resources that way, that is fine. I just don't want to be able to give him free maneuvering capability. And this is how it's looking at the end of my turn here. Feeling very good. Another shot of that. On his turn, Davy's got a couple abilities cooked up, Fury and Call of the Wild, which are, one's a shooting buff, and then the other is an attack buff. And Fury can actually be used in close combat as well. Great ability. So he decides to move over his warriors to shoot at my behemoth, and he does put a fatigue on him. So I did have +1 armor that I used from Flood of Power that turn. And he decides to send in his own behemoth, who has a fatigue on him. And let's see. Another Davy Wood. So we had to take photos of our dice rolls here. So he gets a paltry 3 hits on me due to my improved armor with Flood of Power, and I get an absolute boatload of hits on him in return. I used a rare, so I don't get the -1 to hit. And his behemoth is wiped out, and then my lad lives. I think I made one of those saves, so I am exhausted, however. And I think that's how Davy's going to end it. So he maneuvers his Hearthguard on the other side over. But yeah, things aren't looking too good for our friend here. So I'm loading up again. I'm going to do another attack run with my creatures with Might. So he has a fatigue on his, I want to say Glade Guard, but those are the models, but the warriors. So they have a fatigue on them, so I'll be able to hit him on 2s. And with Might, and I'll be able to add 3 attacks and reroll 3 hits. So I'll be able to do some damage. Now, the deceptive thing is these are warriors, and he does have some combat abilities that he can use. So it ends up being a real slaughterfest here. He hits with all of his attacks. I hit with all of mine. And after everything's said and done, I wipe out his warriors, and I got 1 creature left who is exhausted. And I move my warlord up with the assistance of a spell from my sorceress. And I'm just getting ready here. I'm getting ready for the big dance with my big guy. And I retreat these guys into the forest, the warriors. And then I move up my flying warriors once again, just to be able to pounce on his warlord. And this is kind of a mistake. So I was very careful keeping my warlord more than short from the behemoth. But these guys are well within short, so there's no reason for me to have actually moved them up that close. And you can see there's 3 fatigue on the behemoth now, so I use the rest on him. And I've got the good old doppelgangers up in defense against any surprise tricks. So he moves his Scourge over on his turn and blasts the last creature with his breath attack. And then he decides to go in against my warlord. And yeah, we got the fight there. Fight! I think I popped doppelgangers at this time, so it just canceled out his attack there. If he had gotten lucky, he could have put quite a few hits on my warlord, and then maybe his warlord could have came in and finished off my guy. So I didn't want that to happen. So he decides to double activate to get his warlord into my behemoth and gets all his attacks through, takes him down. So some blood here for Davey. His warlord is exhausted, unfortunately. So that's it for him. My turn. Just queuing up more activations. Send in the flock here to finish off his warlord. And we do take him out. He kills a couple. Send in my warlord against his Scourge. And it's actually pretty close. It's not really a sure thing. Even with 10 attacks plus 3 for might, re-rolling 3s, I'm still just hitting him on 4s. And I think I'd have to do 5 wounds to take him out completely. So I think I just did 3 or 4. So he lives. I bounce back. And that's how it's going to end on my turn. His turn. Just some desperation moves from Davey here. Sends in his Hearthguard into my warriors. So here's kind of another mistake here for me at least. So I had a couple guys just hanging out on the edges here. So there's no reason. They should have been just slightly inside the woods. So his unit wouldn't have been able to engage like that. So no need to get sloppy with your movement. Of course, completely didn't really matter in the slightest. It's not really a good matchup for Hearthguard going against 11 warriors with heavy weapons. He kills 2, I kill 2. And then just for the heck of it, he sends them back in, and they're completely wiped out. So no luck there. He moves off with his Scourge. And I think that is the last photo of our battle here. So Davey, with the units destroyed, survival points, he's either got a 0 or a negative score. I'm in the mid-20s here. So everything went to plan pretty much. And I was lucky on top of it. So I think the scenario favored me, the way that the cards came out. I have experience. I kind of know what I'm doing, gunning for a sorcerer, making sure I have units to keep the pressure on. And then I got, if anything, I got more luck than Davey in the end with some of those, wiping out the levy, surviving his behemoth, wiping his behemoth out. So it could have been a different game, much closer for sure. Just a couple minor mistakes that I noticed after the fact with my positioning. But the game is all about positioning, and you know, you're going to have 10 or 15 of those over the course of the game. So just slight, where if you move something slightly different, you're going to be out of range of something or take a fatigue. So just always being careful, I think, and making sure you don't make those little tiny mistakes will go a long way towards playing a tight game of Saga, maximizing your wins. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions about what happened here, obviously I skimmed over some stuff, so there might be some rest activations or details or abilities that I didn't describe. But I'm happy to elaborate if you had some questions about what went down or why he didn't do this or why I didn't do that. So yeah, thanks for watching. Glad to get another battle report in. Completely overdue. And like I said in my Monte video, so we have the new Monte monthly videos, Montleys. I don't know what I'm going to call those yet. We played a second game immediately after this one. Well, we played a game of Arena Rex immediately after this, but then we played another game of Saga, and we used the cards again, and that one came out completely different, a completely different style of scenario, and that one was a lot tighter. Davey played my army, so he knew what he was expecting, and I kind of knew what I was trying to go for. So I have the pictures for that one. That one's going to be a battle report as well. Probably won't be this following. I have a Spanish faction review with Chris Heinze from Poland that I need to get out before the Polish Grand Melee. So that's probably going to come out before that one. But it'll be interesting to compare and contrast those battles. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. I don't have picks up of my demons yet, unfortunately, if that's one of your questions. But I'm hoping to get those up pretty soon here, getting them all rebased. And that's it. I'm out for real. Have a good one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
Saga!